Hi, and welcome to Brainstorm, Changemakers by Timo. In this series, we're talking to experts, activists, and movers who are shaking things up in the neurodivergent space. My name is Bo, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm the inclusion and belonging lead at Timo, a Danish-based startup that gives neurodivergent people the planning power to take charge of their day. Today, I have with me Dayna Halliwell. Dayna is a UK-based disabled actor, writer, theater practitioner, and content creator. With a bachelor's in acting and a master's in disability in the arts, Dayna bridges her theatrical experience with her advocacy and has amassed a following of over 130,000 people in under a year. Hi, Dayna. We are so happy to have you. Welcome.
To start us off, I would just love if you would tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Dayna. I'm a digital content creator, predominantly on TikTok, but do other platforms too. And I'm also autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, OCD, and have chronic pain. So lots of different perspectives. And I make content in and around my lived experience. And I use a lot of comedy as a vehicle for that, which I'd like to think is refreshing in the social space and can kind of educate people in a way that is engaging and educational.
Yes. And growing up, were there any big moments that helped you kind of discover and later understand your neurodivergence or maybe your chronic pain? Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think growing up, I didn't have access to diagnosis. So I was part of that large group of people that didn't know that I was neurodivergent, but I was labelled the special kid and I always had one-to-one support. So basically had the practical care of being neurodivergent without any explanation, which can be really difficult when you're a child because you don't understand why you're different and it's very black and white. So in terms of pivotal moments, I think they're probably rooted in more negative experiences. In the UK, we have something called a pen license. I don't know if you've heard of that. So in primary school, a lot of primary schools do it. You start with pencil and you have to wait for your handwriting and spelling to be good enough to get a pen. And it's this big award that you get in front of your class. And I never got mine, so I shouldn't legally be writing with a pen. But I distinctively remember, obviously that experience is inherently very ableist. And I obviously, as a pivotal moment, that was something that really comes to the forefront when I think about my educational experiences as a child, those kind of key milestones that I just never hit. So sorry, it's more negative, but unfortunately that is the life story, I'm afraid, in early education.
I'm wondering then what it kind of felt like to be diagnosed and to have the words to understand yourself. What did that change for you?
A massive thing. I mean, so for context, I was diagnosed as dyslexic in my first year of university. So it's quite late. Dyspraxia I was already diagnosed with, but I didn't have the terminology until I was much older and basically got re-diagnosed with it. And then we looked at my medical history and turned out I'd been diagnosed as a child, but no one had actually educated and upskilled my parents in and around what it was. They just saw the word developmental delays and thought, oh, well, that's because Dayna can't walk yet. So, and her coordination's off, but she'll grow out of it and, inaccurate. But yeah, and then I was diagnosed as autistic only last year. So that was quite pivotal in terms of that diagnosis, because before that I'd been diagnosed with OCD for a couple of years. And it was actually a therapist that I saw finally that was a specialist in OCD that said to me, Dayna, I think you're autistic. I've got OCD as well. They are separate things, but the way I was engaging with therapy to them was signs that I was autistic, and I was. So obviously that changed a massive thing in terms of understanding myself and how I operate and the things that I struggle with, and knowing that it's not just me being not functioning like other people, because I would always be so jealous and look at people and be like, how are you able to do all this stuff? How are you able to hold down a job and do all these things? And it turns out it's because I'm neurodivergent, and obviously I've ended up building a career based off a special interest, which is disability. So which I think a lot of neurodivergent folks and disabled people do, because it's where we find comfort. So it kind of helped me harness that, and it's basically driven my whole career. I mean, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't neurodivergent and disabled. Yeah, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. So it changed an awful lot in terms of understanding.
And yeah, you kind of just started sharing about this, but how did going through the school system and the medical system shape you into the person that we kind of know you from your social media today?
Well, I think so. have a master's degree in neurodiversity. And it was actually during that, I did it during COVID. So I was a very solo learner, which I actually loved. I hated going into uni, and I actually progressed really quite high up in terms of grades because I could just bathe in special interest to kind of navigate what I wanted to navigate. But I actually made my first TikTok video as a result of reading an awful lot of research and being like, how is this? Like, did you have disabled people in the room when you did this? Like, and just reading like the tonality and actually seeing that like my experiences, whilst they are individual to me, there is a lot of statistics that back up that other people go through the same thing. So like, I always thought a teacher whispering in my face about being taken out of the classroom was very isolate to my experience. And it turns out that when I actually made a video and did that, it's not. So it's really comforting, to be honest, to kind of take those statistics and actually put a story to them in terms of what it can look like in real life. In terms of medical stuff, because there's slightly different pathways, the medical field I find a lot more difficult to navigate. And that is because for a long time, everything was just blamed on the fact I was autistic. And it can be really difficult being autistic and trying to explain what pain is and how it sits in your body. And also like common fact, well, it's not a common fact, actually, it's a fun fact. Dyspraxia, it can be really difficult to identify pain until it's really bad, because dyspraxia is all about pathways in the brain. So, you know, I would often let things get really bad, infections get really bad, until it was bad enough for somebody to really notice. So I think in terms of that, I've learned to advocate for myself more and try to recognize with my therapist, try to recognize what those feelings of pain mean to me and how I can communicate them. But I'm still kind of on that journey, if I'm totally honest. It's not really reached a point where I could give any groundbreaking advice. The medical system is inherently quite behind in terms of how they approach neurodivergent people, especially A&E departments, which is where I have spent a lot of time. So yeah, I think that answered your question. Sorry if that was a bit of a long-winded response, but kind of two pathways.
Yeah, it was a long question as well. So, and how has comedy kind of helped you understand more about yourself and your identities?
Oh my gosh, like so much. Like, I was an actor, a theatre maker for a long time. And I had to unfortunately leave that industry because I just couldn't function in it, which is really sad, but just wasn't accessible to me at the time. And I hope there is a day when it's accessible. But comedy was always something I absolutely loved. And when I found the space on TikTok where I was able to kind of create content that I wanted to create at a pace that worked for me, I don't think I ever inherently set out to make it funny. I think I just made it obvious, which is an autistic trait. And it was funny because it's so absurd that this happened. Like, you know, like, and I think that's why I try to do my content. Like, if something happens to me in my day-to-day life and I'm like, hang on a minute, things that just like kind of skirt under the surface, like really highlighting them and bringing them to the forefront, it makes it comedic because it is ridiculous that these things happen. Like, they shouldn't happen. So I find a lot of healing from the content I make. And I'd like to think that other people have similar interactions with it in the comments.
Absolutely. Yes. As someone who watches your videos very much. So what is the value of comedy in really like understanding and expressing yourself? And also, have you found community kind of through creating this content?
Oh yeah. I mean, the community online, particularly the disabled and neurodivergent community, is amazing. I do think social media it gets a lot of negative press, but in terms of like marginalized groups and people being able to connect with people like themselves and seeing themselves reflected in content is super important across the board. And social media does amplify those voices. And that is really important. In terms of comedy, it's, like I said, I think it's kind of like a natural bypass of what I do. I don't sit down and think I'm going to make a really funny video. But what I do like about my content and what I would like to think does happen is non-disabled and non-neurodivergent people engage with it, because I think it kind of tricks them into watching the video because it's engaging, and then they're like, it's a disabled person. Whereas I think sometimes that kind of traditional kind of activism space of like face to camera, like non-disabled and neurodivergent people can look at it and go, well, this isn't for me. But actually it's totally for them because it's how they engage with people in our world. So I'd like to think that comedy is kind of a vehicle for all people to engage with my content, even if it means that I bear the brunt of discriminatory language and hate comments, you know? So that's kind of how I try to navigate that social space.
Yeah. And how does your content kind of challenge the stereotypes that folks may have about what neurodiversity and disability looks like and is?
I think there's a massive focus on my content about hidden disability, because I think because of the way as a society we've built up disability, people, if they've not engaged with it, they think it looks one way. And I think in terms of neurodiversity, like I'm a massive advocate for celebrating neurodiversity, but also not using the celebration as a way to not give access and recognize it as a disability. Like my autism does disable me. And whilst I am proud to be autistic, you know, I struggle, and that is the bottom line. So I think it's like striking the balance on social media between I'm proud of who I am and I wouldn't change it, but equally let's not pretend like I'm not disabled in the world we've built.
Like it's a superpower.
Yeah, that narrative is a bit it touches a bit sensitive for me, because like I said, I'm all about pride, and I think if it's done in the right way, like through things like this, then that's great. But I think it could be weaponized, and I think we have to be careful of that as a community to make sure that it's not just like, well, it's superhero, so it's not a struggle. It's like, no, you're misunderstanding. Some of the traits make me think differently and make me produce things in a way that you wouldn't think of. But do I still get overstimulated and you know, struggle to regulate my emotions? Yes. So
exactly.
Kind of a balance, I think.
Yeah, it's a neutral term and like identity. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so how do you find the balance between, you know, comedy and, you know, being sensitive, that this can be like a hard thing for folks, especially when exploring, you know, maybe the challenges of being neurodivergent?
I think I only ever speak from my experience, and that's something I've always led with in my content. When you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. I think that's traditionally an autism saying, but I think it's across the board. So even though, like, you know, people are always surprised to know that I have a master's degree in it, but I very rarely put that at the forefront of my content, because from engaging in that research, I know that's what's missing is individual voices. So the way I manage the sensitivity is purely speaking from my own experiences and things that have happened to me. I would never want to speak for the full community. And obviously the goal is that people resonate with it. But I try to avoid like brush statements or, you know, things that will clump us together as a stereotype or create a new stereotype, because how I experience neurodiversity and disability will be different from other people. So I don't think I've ever given it like a lot of thought, but that is the driving force that I think. I always think, well, if it's authentic to me, then it's sensitive because I'm sensitive to myself.
Absolutely. 100%. And then, you know, you've shared a bit about your background and what you do, but how do you balance, you know, having a full-time job and content creation while still actually like finding time to care for yourself and your needs?
Honestly, working with a disabled-led organization. So before I worked at Purple Go, I couldn't really maintain a job, even though I'm highly qualified and skilled in my area and have a lot to give. It just wasn't an accessible environment. Fortunately for me, Purple Go and my manager is, well, 50% of the team have a disability or have lived experience of neurodiversity. Like, so we are very progressive in terms of how we handle and support people in the workplace. One of the main things is we're a remote first agency. So obviously that ticks a lot of boxes in terms of flexibility, working hours, being able to have heat packs all over your body should you need them in a call. You know, it's things like that. So I think I would say that in terms of how I manage it, I think it's the circumstances I've built, and not just because I could do any job, and also because it's a special interest. So talking about disability day in, day out is, you know, even though it brings big feelings, I could bathe in it. So it's okay. In terms of self-care and then kind of navigating the campaign side, my job is obviously in influencer marketing, and I'm a content creator. So I actually end up working with a lot of my friends. So it's always really a weird dynamic to be like, hi, like, yes, I'm at this event, but I'm here with Purple Go, or yes, we're working on this campaign, but I'm with Purple Go. But I actually think it's a good bridge between agency and creator that I'd like to think I bring to the table. So they kind of inform each other. In terms of like campaigns and ads that I do think that's a little bit more separate, and that is something that is quite draining on me. Because when I've been in work all day and I've done meetings, to bring myself to record, to speak can be very challenging. I'm fortunate enough that I have an agent that will have those difficult conversations. So I'm not at the forefront of saying, actually, Dayna's not in, like, we need to push this deadline. And he advocates for me, like, with brands. So yeah, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that make my life work, basically, is what I'm saying. A lot of support. So yeah, and then in terms of self-care, honestly, it's rooted in routine. So I have a partner at home, and we have very set routines in terms of food, things that I eat, how we have our evening, how we have our mornings. And I think those things for me are really important, that kind of keep me somewhat level and put me on a better stead. I also have a dog, so that's
all right. Gotta love a good routine. I heard there's an app for that, actually, so that's cute.
That's yeah.
I'm also wondering at Purple Goat how, being in a diverse and inclusive team has kind of helped you feel like more of a sense of belonging and safety at work, and maybe how that differs from like past roles that you've had.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I could preach Purple Goat's praises all day long. Like, basically what you see on the outside is absolutely how they are in on the inside. Like, it's not it's not tokenistic. It's absolutely like what you see is what you get in terms of inclusivity. I mean, for me, it's been the upskilling and education around other people in the team, because obviously I'm not the only one that's disabled or neurodivergent, and kind of understanding the nuance of the disabled and neurodivergent experience for me has been really, like, because obviously I'm a content creator, so I'm so used to talking about my life and how I struggle. But obviously there are disabled people that it's a lot more insular, and that's totally okay too, and how they talk about their disability. So I think one thing that Purple Goat does really well is there's no kind of like, well, you have to tell us you're disabled to get this access. It can just be, hey, like, I don't know how I feel, but I'm not feeling very good right now. Could I take a break? Absolutely. Take the time you need. Those kind of things. And I think it's those like little, and I think it's rooted in management, if I'm totally honest. I think it's how it produces more productivity. Like, we're so productive as an agency because we're flexible and we trust our employees to know how to work for themselves, and everybody's really invested in what we do and the mission behind it, which is getting more disabled representation in the media, which of course we want. So yeah, I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'd go on for ages with Purple Goat. They really are a great agent, great employer.
I'm so glad that you found that space.
Yeah, they didn't pay me to say that.
This is not sponsored, but I'm so glad to hear that you've found that space to work in. Yeah, could you guide us a bit through your creative process? From the idea to the final posting. Like, what does that process look like for you?
Honestly, like 99.9% of my stories of things that have happened. So it won't necessarily translate into a video straight away. It could, but most of the time something will happen that will cause a bit of trauma, and I'll be really upset about it. And then a couple of days later, I'll be like, actually, somebody saying I don't look disabled when I'm with a blue badge in the disabled parking bay is like really weird. Like, that is odd behavior. And then I'll kind of start to ideate and kind of amplify the characters in it. Because for me, I always like to, like I said, I like to make it obscure. Like, I like to make it look ridiculous. So I always make sure there's like glasses balanced on my nose and like different costume choices. And then from there, I sometimes will write a script. I think it depends on how complex the idea is. But most of the time, I honestly just set up my camera and give it a go. And then as I do it, and I kind of shift the pictures and storyboard with like the clips that I'm making, I'll like refilm them if I didn't quite say something the way I want to say, or I'll be like, well, actually, I'm missing something there, and I'll redo it. So yeah, I think the turnaround time pretty much like something will happen, couple of days, reflection period, filming, review, posting, and then there's a whole other kind of experience that happens once you post it and people take it on as their own.
And how do you stay true to yourself in your content while, adapting to the social media landscape that is like simply constantly changing?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not a trends person. If you go to my page, you won't really see it. I don't have the capacity as a neurodivergent or disabled person to be trying to hit trends. I would like to think that I just stayed really authentic to experiences I've had. And that's pretty much where it starts and finishes. I have in the past convinced myself that I need to post this many times a day and do this and do that. And actually, like, there's no hard and fast rule with content. And I think particularly in the disabled and neurodivergent content creating space, I think creators need to give themselves a break. It's create a schedule that works for you. Don't try and fit these like gurus on social media telling you need to post 4 times a day, because also if you're posting about your own life and your disability and neurodiversity, like that's a lot of yourself to give over. And like, it's not anybody's job to educate or upskill. It's a choice to, you can, but you don't have to, not every day, all day. Like, one of my main pieces of advice when I like meet followers in person is like, it is not your responsibility to educate other people. Like, it's a choice you make, but Google's free. Like, protect your brain. And I think that's the same with social media. Don't fall into that you've got to post 4 times a day, because it's different when you're a disabled neurodivergent creator, because you're making content that is your life. Like, and there is a lot of trauma around it. So honestly, the advice is to ignore any kind of trend, but that's just my advice.
How do you kind of balance staying authentic in your content and then also like protecting your energy and like not sharing like too much of yourself where it feels harmful?
Mm-hmm. I think that's because I've created this very clear setup with my audience, which is the skit content. It's very rare. Like, I have done it in the past if I felt really enraged by something, to share like in the moment upset. I think there's like one video on my Instagram where I am like sobbing, which is like the only time I've ever shared something like that. And I did regret doing it because the interactions with it in the comments felt a lot more vulnerable. Whereas when you create it into a skit, you compartmentalize it a little bit more. So if anybody inherently has something bad to say about it, which they will, it's a bit more removed than like you bearing your soul on social media and people kind of, so I think setting up a clear convention and a style in a way that's like digestible, but like not too heavy, even if the subject matter's heavy, is how I protected myself. Very seldom make content that is in the moment, because I also am disabled. So I honestly, a lot of the time, don't have capacity in the actual moments to make that kind of content.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I compartmentalize it, I think.
Yeah, totally. And then how, content creation, as you've kind of hinted at, comes with a lot of highs and lows. So how do you navigate those fluctuations and, online engagement, like shares, comments, and trolls? Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of engagement, like I'm seeing, like, for example, like the last couple of days, I've seen a low in my views. And I think when I first started out, like I would take that so onto myself, because obviously when you're a content creator, like it's yourself you're putting out there. So when the feedback doesn't come back, it can be really like a bit soul destroying. But I have also learned that TikTok is inherently like crazy, as in like it's got no rhyme or reason to anything. So I just like to make good content, or content that I like and like to consume and would watch, and then let the algorithm take the wheel. And 9 times out of 10, like it always fluctuates and comes back up. Like, 1 week you'll be riding high with millions of views, and the next week you'll be struggling to get 10K. And I know that sounds like odd in the context of like, but like as a creator who does it as a job, that's quite a significant like drop or difference. In terms of hate comments, like I'm quite passionate about this. I think platforms need to do more to support disabled and marginalized groups. I honestly, I think that's like, this needs to be the bare minimum. Like, for example, like comment sections, if somebody hasn't sworn, then you can't report it. And for me, like there's a lot of things that people can say in between that will cause trauma to that person, and they've already experienced enough trauma, like across the board. And I think that's where things need to change. And that goes from, being queer, because I'm queer, but like, or being disabled, or, whatever it is. I think platforms need to do more. So that's kind of the advocacy side. In terms of how I deal with it, is I don't read my comments, which is actually quite sad, because there's also a lot of people in there that are resonating with the content, but I just found it way too overwhelming, because unfortunately you can read thousands of good comments, but if you read one really bad comment, that sets you up really negatively. And I don't, my therapist, I'm an advocate for therapy clearly, has said to me in the past that in a way, they don't think that the human psyche is meant to take on that much public opinion. And I'm inclined to agree. Yeah. Like, we are not built for thousands of people to have an opinion on us and how we live and who we are, because that's the other thing as well. Things that creators are making, particularly from marginalized groups, it's based in like basic human rights, in my opinion. So yeah, I just don't interact with the comments, unfortunately. And I always think if somebody really wants to get a hold of me, which does happen, they'll Instagram DM me and have conversations that way. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky space, but
yeah. Well, shout out to therapy for helping you kind of figure out what feels good.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any neurodivergent role models that you kind of look up to or gain inspiration from?
Oh my gosh, I feel like there's so many. And to be honest, most of them are my friends, like in the content creation space. I do think social media has been so good for the like neurodivergent and disabled movement. Obviously, like we just touched on the more negative side of that, but like on the flip side is being able to amplify voices, which is so important. So Ruby, I can't remember their app right now. I'll find it in a minute. They make content about being autistic, but also working with higher support needs, autistics who have higher support needs, which I think is really important, because often on social media, particularly within the autism space, it can be dominated. And whilst like the experience that I have is really important, we should absolutely be talking to people that also have different experiences, and that's across the board, and we should be including them in conversations. This line is mine. Cheryl, great creator, makes a lot of great content around being a nurse and being autistic and being part of the LGBTQ plus community, which I really resonate with and kind of helped me find my own queerness through their content. So that's great. Honestly, I could this list could go on and on. Yeah, I mean, I honestly think my role models are rooted in social media, like they are for a lot of people. I don't think I have any mainstream necessarily, because I think progressiveness and progressive tonality is on social. Ellie Mids is another one. Fantastic creator who's making real waves, and I'm really excited for her book as well. So yeah, like so many people, I could just like list people forever, but content creator friends, absolutely.
Big yes. Then how do you see the future of neurodivergent and disabled representation changing both on social media and then also in mainstream media?
I think so people go, well, we often talk about this because obviously it's a goal of the agencies, and I think I think a lot of people will think that inclusive campaigns mean that we focus on one group, and whilst we need to do that right now to amplify those voices, the future is just naturally inclusive. That's what I want. I mean, right now we need to amplify these groups because they've not had any amplification, but in the future, I'd like to think it's just like a natural thing that happens. It's like, well, yeah, of course we need. Everyone deserves to see themselves reflected in all content. Like that's the goal, I think. And I think as well, in terms of neurodiversity and disabilities, breaking down stereotypes. Yeah, and in terms of media, I actually went to go and watch a theatre show last night that was probably the most progressive piece of theatre I've ever seen around disability in my life, which is incredible. It completely captured the nuances of, it was a wheelchair user, so it kind of captured the nuances of grieving for your body, which is something I've absolutely gone through, right through to kind of the disability pride aspect and how you navigate both feelings. Like both feelings can exist at the same time. I think that's true for a lot of people. And I think it was also an inclusive cast behind and like on stage, like across all groups. And I just think that's the goal, isn't it? That's the goal. And having people in the room, like don't tell stories about the people without the people that you're making the stories about in the room. So yes, that's in terms of mainstream media. It's just making it a natural by process of like the marketing or casting process, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And social media is definitely platforms doing more to support creators.
Yes. And what advice would you give to budding neurodivergent content creators or activists who might be hesitant to share their stories?
It's always really difficult because you see a lot of advice that's like, just give it a go. But I'm also aware of, like, from being at the other side now, what also comes with that in terms of what you give and what you gain back. And I would be like, my advice would be to make content that makes sense for you and protects you. So like, if you're like, don't feel obliged, like I'm not, to share like the ins and outs of your daily life. You can develop like a convention or a way of delivering content that is not in the moment of the trauma or in the moment of the experience, and that's okay. And also, just because you've not seen it done before doesn't mean it can't be done. I've never necessarily seen a disabled person do a skit the way I do it before. I'm not saying I invented skits in the disabled community. I'm just saying that I never saw it. So, you can create your own kind of convention and make it work. And as long as it's authentic, that's all that really matters.
Yes. Well, all about protecting your energy as you explore this work. Yeah. As we close out, what's next for you? Is there anything coming up there you're extra excited about?
Well, I think I obviously navigate both the full-time job and my content creation. So like, as a Purple Goat side of things, like I'm just constantly excited by the kind of brands we're engaging. Like the change that we're able to make through that is incredible, as in terms of like even upskilling and educating bigger organizations around inclusion and diversity is just, yeah. So I'm excited. There's a lot of brands that obviously I can't say, but like there's a lot of brands that are actually really engaging with disability, and you'd be really surprised. And they're doing a great job at it, and they're actually on that journey. So that's that side of things. In terms of content, I'm just really enjoying creating series-based content. I am very interested to actually do a podcast too, if I can have the capacity for it. So I think definitely that, and also just getting into more campaigns and making it more normalized to have diverse and inclusive representation across the board in campaigns. I think I would be excited to begin to do campaigns that aren't just focused on me being disabled. That's the crossover I'm really excited to see, because obviously like I sit in the disabled space where I love making disabled-based content about just products that support disabled people. But it would also be really great to just like be a part of a campaign where non-disabled creators are involved as well, and it's not necessarily about my narrative. It's not just shoehorned in, if that makes sense. So, or like a quota. That's actually why I really liked working with Team Anna, because it was like just a natural fit. Like it's a natural fit, which I love. So yeah, I think that's quite exciting. So yeah.
I'm so excited for you, and yeah, just really grateful that we get to keep working together. It's really sweet. But that actually closes out our interview.